Sorry, that's my stand-in that I use for setting everything up. Good looking stand-in though, wouldn't you say? Hi, and welcome. This is, whoops, that's the wrong one. This is Write a Play. This is one of the most intimidating projects that students do, simply because, I think because it's asking you to try to be creative. I'd really like to hope that you'll let yourself go. I'd like to take a moment to make a real quick politically correct warning. I'm going to be talking about some subject matter that might involve stereotypes. Stereotypes are a typical object of jokes, and we're going to be talking about the joke you selected, and so I will be talking about some of that. If I offend you, I apologize. If I really offend you, please send me a message and I'll send you a personal apology and I don't know, a fig cake or something. I will apologize. All right, so we're going to talk about picking or writing a play. And that play is going to be based on the joke I asked you to get in the previous lecture. Now, I probably should have said before you started this lecture, it would be really nice, and I think handy for you, if you were to run off a copy of the demo scene that's in this folder. It might be helpful for you to look at it when I start talking about the demo scene in here. So I'm going to take a moment and take a little pause, and while you go get that or run it off. So I'm going to pause. All right, that's long enough. We're back. So I hope you've got that written out. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the joke that you came up with, the three-part joke or the story joke, and we are going to turn it into a play. Earlier, you had lectures on Aristotle, and we talked about Aristotle's structure of plot. And if you remember, he talked about the way tragedies were laid out and the way comedies were laid out. If you remember talking about the comedies, he talks about a series of steps that happens in comedies, and that these steps needed to happen in this order, and he gives us a bunch of turns. Well, I've got another method of organizing drama, and it actually works to organize darn near anything. And it's a three-part organization, and we're going to be making use of that three-part organization in writing our play. So, we start with the joke. And at the very first part of the joke, oops, that's wrong, is the beginning. We call it the beginning. I bet you've guessed the other two. In the beginning of the play, as well as the joke, we meet the characters. And this is where we have to meet the characters and we find out what the plot or the scheme is that's going to set up the joke. Very often, story jokes will start off with something along the lines of a pilot, a doctor, and a stewardess are stranded on a desert island. And that right there would be the beginning of the joke. And it's going to form the basis of the beginning of our play. The number one thing to remember through all of this, number one, show, don't tell. Show us. Don't tell us about it. Don't have a narrator. A lot of students like to solve their problems with a narrator. No narrators are allowed. So what you would want to set up in the beginning would be a scene involving these three characters, and you're going to write dialogue that's going to establish who they are. You can make that up in conversations, or you can have them do little monologues that might define something. The stewardess on a desert island might be complaining that, she can't get any of the little booze bottles, or how difficult her job is, and now on this desert island she has to be a stewardess to these other two, or whatever the problem is. Rather than just telling us she's a stewardess, let her tell us who she is and define her. If you look at the demo play, I wrote in there about the three pieces of string. I simply gave them a scene at the very beginning where they talk while waiting outside to go into the bar to get the beer. And I tried to give each of the pieces of string a little bit of personality. And that's what you want to look for. If by the time you get to the end of the joke, we need to know that the stewardess is also deeply religious, and we find that out at the end of the joke. We may want to establish that earlier in that beginning scene. So here is where you're probably going to do the most expansion of the joke in order to fill up time. The requirement of the play is it be about 3 to 5 minutes. I'm not overly picky on that, but it needs to be about 3 to 5 minutes. And so generally think about that makes up the beginning. If you have questions, please contact me. I'll be happy to answer them for you. The second part. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. That's definitely not supposed to happen. I know which one it is now. We're still doing write a play out. The second part is the middle. The middle is where the parts of the joke take place. In the 3 pieces of string, the middle of the play is the series of scenes, and I think I have 6 or 7 of them. It's the series of scenes that make up the bulk of the joke. In the 3 pieces of string play, it's about strings 1 and 2 going in, trying to get beer and not being able to get it. And I set those up in the demo play as an individual separate scene. Now, I could have done some other things which would help lengthen the script and make it a little bit longer. I could have established who the bartender was by in that first scene before the first piece of string comes in. I could have had the bartender, for instance, or the bar owner, excuse me, having a conversation with a waitress or something about his bigotry against string and rope products or whatever it is. And that way we could establish who he is prior to the entrance of the first piece of string. That would have made that first scene a little longer. That might be the next spot I would go and expand on it. So the middle are the things that happen. You know, if it's a story about 3 bears trying to decide to eat porridge, whatever it is, it's what happens when the first 2 do it. It is all designed to set up the end. The end is the hardest part for a writer to write. If any of you are familiar with watching shows like Saturday Night Live or any of those live sketch type shows, the most difficult thing with them and where they inevitably fail is their endings. It's pretty easy to write a beginning and a middle, to be honest with you. It's getting that ending. Well, the joke gives us a perfect ending. It gives us the punchline. And so the punchline serves as our end. Pretty much that may wrap up the play. That may just wrap it up and be done with it right at the punchline. But like in the 3 strings example, I gave a little exit line, and that is a line that the character uses to leave on. In this case, it was just messy, kind of putting down the bartender to make up for his bigotry against string, I guess. But that's the idea. You want to think about your play as a beginning where we're going to establish who the characters are and what the situation is. A middle where we're going to tell the story, we're going to have the episodes occur. The 3 characters that are involved are each going to, I guess we'll say, do their thing. And lastly, we need to have an ending. So I hope that makes sense to you. I hope, give it a chance. Here's what I would like you to do, is take your joke and use it as an outline, for instance. And spend a little bit of time writing it out and seeing what you can do to figure out who the characters are. And once you've worked on it to a point where you think it's pretty good, I'd like you to set it aside for at least 24 hours and then look at it again. There's an old adage among playwrights, and that is plays aren't written, they're rewritten. And the idea there is you need to separate yourself after you've directly worked on something in order to go back and work on it again. Part of the purpose of this assignment is to have you recognize what it is to put your own thoughts down on paper for others to use. Because in a script, when a playwright writes a script, they're never writing it for themselves, they're writing it for other actors to use. And so that's what you should work on. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, and this is fairly picky, is the format of the play. The format. Oh, I almost put that wrong. The format of the play. Oh, there it is. This is how it's laid out. I'm somewhat picky on that, and I'm going to go through those things that I'm very picky about. Now, one of the things you're going to have to do is submit this assignment via the test mechanism that will follow this lecture. In that test mechanism, you'll be submitting either a Word document or a PDF document, and it must be in this format. And so I want to go through the parts of that format rather quickly. Let's see what we've got here. First of all, it should be on letters. You had to put that black on white right there, didn't you? Thank you. I'll sit oddly. It needs to be on letter size paper, black ink on white paper. Letter size, black ink on white paper. If you're ever going to submit a play or ever going to submit anything to a publisher, it must be black ink on white paper. And if you ever have to submit something to me, it must be on black ink on white paper. So that's the number one format. Margins. Margins are really critical. The margins for this assignment are 1 inch top, bottom, and left, 1.5 inches on the right. Now, this is important because these margins are designed to give the actor or the performer a little bit of extra space in order to write notes. And that's why we have that bigger margin on the right of pages. So margins, 1 inch on top, bottom, and left, 1.5 inches on the right. Character names in a script format are always in all caps and bold. All caps and bold. All character names are in all caps and bold. Let's see if I can work this. I'll give you an example here. This is the demo scene that you're looking at right here, and I think it's this one right here. Let's take a quick look. Come here. There you go. We can take a look here, and we can see bar owner, all bold in caps, string 1. All of the characters as they run down the page are all bold, all caps. So no matter where the character's name appears, whether it's up here in stage directions, which I'll talk about in a minute, or whether it's within the dialogue, all characters' names are always all capped and bold. That's the one. There we go. Hi. And so all caps and bold. A tab between character name and dialogue. I say a tab, and when I say tab, that's kind of a technical term on your keyboard. You might be very familiar with that, but most word processors let you set your tabs. The default tab in Microsoft Word seems to be about 1/2 inch. Some playwrights, I have a good friend who's a playwright, he always does 4 spaces on his space bar. But again, we'll take another quick look here, and we can see that we've got string 3 and then followed by a space. Now I've got it all pretty even. That doesn't have to be that way, but there should be a clean space between the bold capped character name and the start of dialogue. Bold capped character name and the start of dialogue. The next thing, let me make sure I got the right one. A tab between, okay, good. The next thing that you want to look at, all stage directions are in italics. All stage directions are in italics. That's important. If the stage direction is within a line of dialogue, we use parentheses to mark it off with. If it's within a line of dialogue, we use parentheses to mark it off with. Let's take one more look here. If I can get rid of that one. Oh, that one's the right one. There we go. And I press that button. We can look at this and we can see here are stage directions right here. Street outside, a common man's bar, blah, blah, blah. Those are all italicized. Then we go down, and if we go down to this line right here, string 1's line, she has got one fine Z twist. Now you'll notice there's a stage direction there. Stage direction, remember, is anything in the script that is not dialogue. But we see a parentheses mark here, makes large motion with hands, and close parentheses mark here. All of that's in italics. So that is, if you're in the script, if it's just stage directions that happen not in a line of dialogue, no parentheses. Within a line of dialogue, make sure you use parentheses. And I hope that makes sense to everybody. In the dialogue, use parentheses. That's it. And so that's the basic format that you need to use for this project. Remember to take a look at that. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the message or to text me. I'll get back to you right away. Don't let this project intimidate you. Have fun with it. Relax. There really isn't a right or wrong, to be honest with you. There's no way to really screw this up unless you don't do it. If you want to screw up, don't do it. Otherwise, I look forward to reading your plays. Good luck! And we'll be talking to you later, or I hope.